Moving from Holland to Australia, the story of my Oma. Australia is a multicultural country, with people from all over the world now calling Australia home. You might have friends or family from Italy or Vietnam or Argentina or a number of other countries. My family comes from Holland, which is a country in Europe on the other side of the world to Australia. This is the story of how and why my grandmother, my Oma, moved to Australia. My Oma grew up in a small town in Holland called Lake. She lived with her mother, father, and 4 younger sisters. Her father was a smart man who had 5 diplomas and worked as an electrician, whilst her mother stayed at home to look after the family. Growing up, my Oma and her family witnessed some of the horrors of World War II, including Nazi soldiers forcing their way into her house to check that her family were not hiding Jewish people. After the war, my Oma's dad wanted to move his family to a safer country with hope of a fresh start. They had heard of some other families getting help from the government to move to Australia. However, my Oma's family were told they would not be helped by the Australian government. This was because they had 5 daughters and no sons, and in those days it was mainly only the men who worked. The Australian government saw my Oma's family as not being able to help work to boost the economy, and so they were not given travel assistance to Australia. My Oma's dad was not happy with this decision, so he decided to sell his business and everything the family owned, buy 7 plane tickets and travel to Australia. My Oma said she was not happy to move to Australia because she was 15 years old with many great friends and a happy life in Holland. You can definitely tell by her passport photo that she was the least happy person in their family about the big move to Australia. On the 15th of April 1951, my Oma and her family said goodbye to their friends and family in Holland and started their journey to Australia. They flew from Holland to Egypt, then to India, then Singapore, and then finally arrived in Darwin in Australia's Northern Territory on the 21st of April 1951. It took them 6 days to make the journey from Holland to Australia. This flight can now be achieved in less than 30 hours. They then flew from Darwin to Sydney, then took a bus out to Bathurst to a migrant camp. Migrant camps were areas where people who had just arrived to Australia could live. They were usually set up in army barracks, where there was plenty of room to build lots of little huts and small homes for new families to live in when they arrived in Australia. All migrants lived in camps like this until the government had finalised their paperwork and the migrants had completed their medical checks. My Oma and her family lived in a migrant camp in Bathurst for 6 weeks, where all 7 family members shared 2 small rooms. They then were moved to another migrant camp in a town called Greta, near Newcastle. In Greta migrant camp, the family lived in a small shelter made out of corrugated iron that looked a bit like a metal igloo. At this point, their family became separated. In order to start making money, my Oma's dad worked closer to Sydney, helping to build the Warragamba Dam, which is now one of the largest dams providing water to Sydney. The rest of my Oma's family stayed in the migrant camp in Greta. Oma's mum looked after the children and helped with cooking and cleaning at the camp, whilst the children went to the migrant camp school and learned English. Because my Oma was 15 when she moved to Australia, she had already been learning English for 3 years, so she had decided she didn't want to go to migrant school and decided to get a job instead. She worked for a family in Newcastle as a nanny, helping the children and their family with cooking, cleaning and babysitting. After 8 months, my Oma's father was given a promotion at his job at Warragamba Dam and was given a house as part of his employment. This meant that my Oma's family could leave the migrant camp and my Oma could leave her nannying job in Newcastle and the whole family could live together in Warragamba. My Oma tried out a few new jobs but then decided to go to TAFE and become a bookkeeper. There were many other migrant families who lived at Warragamba, and after a few years my Oma met my grandfather, my Opa. They eventually got married, moved to Earlwood in Sydney and had 4 children. Then they became an Oma and an Opa to 12 grandchildren and enjoyed their retirement in Cronulla. Unfortunately, my Opa passed away when I was still a child, but I am lucky to still regularly see my Oma, and I would like to thank her very much for helping me to create this video and for the photos she generously provided.